Hello, Alastair Campbell here, not with Rory today, but with the Mooch, Anthony Scaramucci. And we're going to have a bit of a kind of North American fest because as well as the Mooch, we've got Mark Carney. Mark, rest his policies, leading listeners will remember we spoke to you last year. And we spoke mainly about his role as a bank governor in Canada and the UK. And I don't know if you remember, Mark, but I asked you whether there was any chance you might sometime go into politics yourself. And you said, well, it's not a known, it's not a yes. And now you've gone and done it. Because Mark Carney is currently running to replace Justin Trudeau as leader of the Liberal Party, which means that he will become Prime Minister. But that could be a brief tenure because then there will be a general election. And right now, Pierre, the populist leader of the right-wing party in Canada, is still doing pretty well in the polls. So, Mark, welcome. First of all, I'm really, really impressed that already early in your political career, you've decided there has to be a flag in the shot.
Well, first off, thank you, Alastair. Thank you, Anthony, for having me on. Yes, there has to be a flag in the shot, not least because today is Flag Day in Canada. It is the 60th anniversary of that flag, the maple leaf flag, becoming the official flag of Canada. And it was a symbol, obviously it's a symbol of nationhood. What happened was we got rid of the old ensign, which had the Union Jack on it and crest, and had a flag that represents the greatness of this country.
And just on that, let me drill down a bit. Why did in the end did you decide you were going to go for it?
A few reasons. One, I read your book, all seriousness, what can I do? And in the context of, kind of in the run up to the holidays, the run up in December to the holidays, country was in a bad way. A lot of pressure on similar effects in the UK and the US, pressure on people, cost of living, housing gotten away. Government hadn't focused on those issues enough. Prospect of a government that, a conservative, very populist government coming in, Trump acolytes in effect coming in. And then with President Trump coming in and some of the early stages of the risks that are now quite manifest, I'm sure we'll talk about them later, I felt I really had a duty to put my hand up and run when the Prime Minister resigned. So, there are times in life, and you've both lived these, where you got to stand up and be counted, and this was one of them.
Mooch.
Yeah, well, Mark, first of all, welcome to the show, Mark. And I think Alastair knows this. You and I started a long time ago at the same place. And so I want to bring it up because Goldman has gone through this arc of Bob Rubin in the government, John Corzine going to governor, Henry Paulson becoming Secretary of Treasury. And there's a little bit of a globalist label on Goldman. And it's a little different world today in terms of where people are thinking about their identity and the identity of Canada. And so make the case, let's say I threw a rock at you or an egg or a tomato. I wouldn't throw a rock at you because I love you, but I'm like an egg or a tomato. And I said, oh, you're a Goldman globalist. What would you say?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there, and that is right. And I would add Mario Draghi to that list, a former Prime Minister of Italy and head of the European Central Bank. Look, I'm looking at you on my screen, Anthony. Never forget where you're from. You still live where you grew up. I'm from, I was born in the north of Canada, Northwest Territories. Grew up in Edmonton in Western Canada. I always came back to this country. These are where my roots are, and you live those values. The second thing I'd say is that the world's a complicated, interconnected place. Those connections are changing. You got to understand the world in order to make sure that it's working for real people. The middle class and hardworking people. I don't think you can ignore it and hope that it's going to go away. And we're seeing it right now in Canada with very, very rapid changes in a world that's more divided and dangerous. And that's starting to affect us. It's going to affect us in a much bigger way. I'd rather have a leader who understands that, who can influence it, but also is anchored where they came from, anchored in the country, and working for the people here.
Anthony, do you think that the right wing will go after Mark on the basis of being, as you say, the Goldman globalist? Is that a useful line of attack for the right, or does that just play up his kind of economic credentials?
Well, I mean, it is, but I think a more useful line, and this is my follow-up question, if you don't mind, Mark, is we're in an anti-incumbency world, Alastair. So it's in addition to the globalist label, and I think Mark can parry that well, and obviously Mario Draghi is a brilliant statesman, and I think we need common sense integrated with the populism. And it's interesting that the conservative right has hijacked the electorate that voted for the left, okay, through our whole lifetime. And so, the question is, how do you make that rearticulation to those people? And how do you get them off of what I would call the anti-incumbency fever that everyone's facing?
Well, I think, look, I'll keep it obviously focused on Canada. I mean, people want change. They want change in Canada. They deserve change. They need big change. And that change starts here with a focus on the economy. I don't think the incumbent government, the Liberal government, had focused enough on the economy or executed as well as they needed to on certain things like government spending, the impact on investment, keeping prices down, increasing competition, all these aspects. So it starts with recognizing that and then focusing on a series of policies, initiatives that are going to address that. And then secondly, look, I'm not an incumbent. I haven't been a politician up until now. I was still thinking about it when Alastair and I last spoke, as he alluded to. And I'm coming in at a time of crisis. And, part of the issue here, I think it holds elsewhere, but I'll focus on Canada, is we are in a crisis. It is not of our own making, but it's a full-blown crisis. And for better or worse, by accident or design, my career has been one of managing crises and helping to build strong economies. And that's what's needed at the moment. So when people look for change, it's, what type of change, the right type of change. You got to make it tangible for people so that they can see exactly what they're getting. But it's an attitude and it's an experience set.
Alastair, is he too normal to be a politician? Alastair?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he's pretty normal. He's
likable.
Nice,
he's articulate. He's well read. He's understands interest rates and monetary policy. Do we need like some kind of reality clown show, or can somebody like Mark Carney, who is somebody you and I would hire for the job, can he punch through the nonsense that's going on in our society right now?
Well, somebody needs to, because Trump is kind of, and I was going to try and avoid talking too much about Trump in the first half, but he is kind of drowning out the debate in so many countries. And I think there is a space for kind of serious, fact-based, analytical politics. And what I wanted to ask you, Mark, is what did you said in that interview that you did with me and Rory that there's different ways of doing public service. So like you saw yourself as a public servant when you were a bank governor. I would have said the same when I was working for the government. The Mooch would have said the same when he was, briefly alongside Trump. There's different ways of doing it. What do you think is the big difference between doing it as an official, which is what you were, and an active politician who has to go out and get people's support?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of things. One, and I'm very conscious of the first point I'm going to make, which is as a governor of a central bank, you have the power and the accumulated credibility of the institution behind you. And that gives you much more weight, assuming your predecessors had done a good job, and they certainly had in the case of Canada. So it gives you much more weight in terms of your actions and influence on markets and on general overall public confidence when they need to look to you. That's different as a politician. You have to earn that. You have to earn that right from the get-go. You have to earn it every single day. So that's the first difference. The second difference is you're supposed to lead. And in leading, you need to help build consensus, and you need to have followers. I mean, you're not leading. Stephen Harper told me this once, former prime minister. If you turn around, there's no one behind you, you're not a leader just because you've struck out in a certain direction. So it's making the argument and building that consensus. I will tell you right now, in Canada, in part because of what we've been through cost of living and other pressures that have been on COVID, the after effects of that. But now the attacks from what had been our closest friend and ally now is just our neighbor. To be clear, the Americans are just our neighbor. It's geography as opposed to kinship. Canadians are looking for that leadership, and they're looking for positive change. They want a positive agenda as opposed to a negative agenda. So it, again, by accident or design, that's the situation I find myself in. And it starts with the economics moving out.
Mooch, before you jump,
last comment heard, Alastair. Did you hear that last comment?
Yeah, but listen, before you jump in, Mooch, I want to point out lots of comments coming in here, Mark, saying that you threw a little bit of shade on the Bank of England there. You talked about the Bank of Canada
Very personal.
having had some great predecessors. What was the point you were making there?
I'm influenced by my geography. I pay full respect to my predecessors at the Bank of England. Boy, I forgot about just the level of sophistication of your collective audience. Yes,
absolutely. But lots of them are saying at least this guy called Brexit right. We don't need to get into that now. Mooch, where do you want to go?
Well, no, I want to talk about the former kinship and now the border, because I do think that it's a little unfair where we are right now. And I could be wrong. I think there's a phase. And remember, Donald Trump won by 50.5% of the vote. I certainly didn't want him to win, but he's there now. And he's presenting this antagonism. But the rest of America isn't antagonistic towards Canada. I meet with business leaders all the time. I was down in Miami recently with a group of Canadians. And Alastair, this. America relies on Canada for energy, aluminum, electricity. And so I guess the question is, how do you reset that and not create more antagonism? Because the business community is with you, Mark. The American business leaders look at you and say, that's the right guy to be the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. Look, let's be clear. There's a lot to work with, and there's decades and decades and centuries of relationships and deep ties. What is striking at the moment is that the business community in private is with me. The business community in public is pretty quiet, and that's not unique to this situation. You see it in a host of other initiatives that the administration is taking, where CEOs, we would know many of the same people and have many of the same conversations I do, and they're 180 degrees in opposition to what the administration is doing, but they're not saying anything about it. And with some degree waiting for the equity market to take a view and provide the discipline. So we're in the age of equity market vigilantes as opposed to principle and approach. So that doesn't go unnoticed. The good news is that I think that there is going to be a point where we're going to show our strength here in Canada. We're going to show our strength. We've got lots of options. We've got lots of things we can do at home. And in fact, Mooch, if I may, we should do at home. One of the good things about this situation is it creates a set of opportunities to take some big reforms, some big measures here at home. I'll use a Canadian expression, mettre chez nous, masters in our own home. And that really resonates because we can't control President Trump. We never could control an American president, but we can't control President Trump. We might be able to influence a bit the approach over time. But what we can control are things here. We're going to focus on that, be strong. And then when it comes time to come back together and talk about how we can work together with those business leaders, with the governors, with broader America, we'll draw on those historic ties.
Mark, have you been surprised? You talked there about the business community being pretty silent. Have you been surprised how the Commonwealth has been pretty silent on the noises that Trump has made? Canada is an important member of the Commonwealth, and also, insofar as Canada has a quote special relationship, of course, with America because of the geography. But historically, I'm assuming the special relationship with the UK is still pretty strong. And yet the level of volume from British leaders has been very, very low. Has that disappointed you?
Well, it's early to get disappointed, but I'll tell you a story. I I had an interview with Faisal Islam, who you'd know British journalist, and it was like this. It was actually on the same laptop. I was in a rural town hall in Nova Scotia, Amherst, Nova Scotia, and at the end of the interview, it was for Newsnight, BBC Newsnight. After it was over, I picked up my laptop and I rotated it 90 degrees and showed him that there was the portrait of King Charles III. Okay, so those ties are deep, they're historic, and they reflect not just common history but common values. And one of the questions that's going to come out of this period, and again, it's in the end, it'll be welcome because it shakes people up and it asks people, okay, what do you really believe in? Who are your real friends? Who are you aligned with? And a question for the UK, and it is very much a question for the UK, as it is for the European Union, the Koreans, the Japanese, others. Okay, where are you going with this? Are you going for a transactional world, or do you view that you have certain you can do a lot of transaction, you can be commercial about it, but where do you have those common values? And I think, it starts with the UK. They've been relatively quiet. I don't think, last point, if I may, I don't think being quiet is a good strategy, because I don't think the approach of the U.S. administration is going to is going to let certain countries off. Let's put it that way. If they hope they're not going to get noticed, so it's a time to figure out where things counted. And actually, I might flip it back to you, Anthony. This may be unfair. It probably goes against the rules, but if I can ask you your perspective with respect to the president, because I think one of the things, in my experience with him, you've had more, but is he respects strength and being clear about what you want, what you have and what you want, as opposed to just hoping, ducking and weaving and hoping everything will go okay.
Well, you have to have surgical contact with him, Mark. And so, as an example, your premier in Alberta went to see him in Mar-a-Lago, and the tariffs in Alberta, I believe, are 10% as a result of that, and not 25. And so, but what you can't do is you can't just show up without an agenda that's clear, because that's why he started calling Prime Minister Trudeau the governor. He's a demeaning sort of a person. He just has a meanness to him. And so when you're a leader of another country, you got to be surgical and you got to be in his face, because he hates conflict, Mark. This is a keyboard warrior, so he hates conflict. You get in his face to negotiate, he'll usually bend on something. And that's something people have learned about him. But my question is about the campaign, if you don't mind. This is related to Prime Minister Trudeau, his popularity, and the anti-incumbency movement. And this is something that Vice President Harris could not do, and that is break from Joe Biden. I think one of the things that really hurt her campaign was when they said, well, would you do anything different from Joe Biden? She said, no, I really can't think of anything. Yeah. And I know when Hubert Humphrey broke from Lyndon Johnson, the polls narrowed, but he broke too late. And so are you going to break from Prime Minister Trudeau, or are you? Yeah. What are the differentiating things that you would say to your constituents?
Yeah, it's an important question. And it's and the answer to that is yes, I already have, and there'll be more. And these are on principle. So let me give you an example. There was an increase that the Prime Minister and his then Finance Minister brought in on the capital gains tax rate. And so the rate of tax on capital gains, and it wasn't just that, it was brought in and it was talked about in I'll put it in simple terms, Alastair, your term, like a class war type approach. These people don't deserve what they have. I think that's fundamentally wrong. I thought it was wrong from a tax policy perspective, and I think it was wrong from a messaging perspective. We have to, and the core message of my campaign is, it's time to build. This is about building homes. It's about building infrastructure, energy, intelligence infrastructure for AI, new trade corridors. We've got to invest and build. And if it's time to build, we like builders. We like people who take risk, who put money to work, and we're going to set up the system to reward that. So that's one example of a break that's not just a policy, but it's an attitude, and it's the attitude backed by policy, I think is critical. We also changed something which was a practical or pragmatic change on the carbon tax, retail carbon tax, where we've removed it. We can get into it if you want. We're doing a bunch of other things that make sure that we still accomplish the emissions and people are made whole. We've made those changes. I think just the scale of change, last point I'll make, on the economy, on building out and really driving investment here, it's just a different emphasis from what Prime Minister Trudeau's government did. And look, it's also part of the times. It's not, it's what we need, but I think it's more stark because of that.
Do you worry, Mark, that you will have to go down some agendas that you really don't believe in? So, for example, you mentioned climate there. Your climate is like your big thing. It's been your big thing since you left the bank. And yet the politics of climate have become much harder. And maybe that's what you were just alluding to. Likewise, Justin Trudeau, fairly or unfairly, was constantly being defined by your neighbors as the king of woke. And, again, I worry that the sort of, because the right are on the march, because the populists are on the march against what they define as woke, which I often define just as social justice and looking out for other people. Do you feel you have to soften some of your actual beliefs because you know that we're in a very different political environment to the one that Trudeau was in even a few years ago?
So there's a couple of things there. I think let me take them in order. On climate, very much we're emphasizing the commercial aspect of it, the competitiveness aspect. This is where the world's going. It'll go. You can see where the trend line is. It'll go in fits and starts. And the U.S. cared about climate a lot 3 months ago. It doesn't care, at least the administration at all right now. At some point, it'll swing back and care again. In the interim, what we have an opportunity in Canada, and we should take this opportunity, is to leapfrog the Americans on this. Well, America's turning inward and turning back the clock on some of these issues. There is an opportunity to really move ahead. That's what the Chinese and the Koreans did the first time around. The Europeans in fits and starts are moving in this direction. They need to more fully get their act together. But we can drive that forward. It's got to be ruthlessly commercial. It's got to be the kind of thing that Anthony would invest in, just to be clear, as opposed to aspirational. So that's the first on that.
So hold on. So you're more interested in Anthony's views on climate than, say, Greta's? We are conscious that. If you give me those two polls, that's right.
But Alastair, I'm a climate realist. I'm not a climate denier.
I'm more interested in Anthony or someone he broadly represents investing in something that's going to get emissions down, but is going to make money and create jobs here in Canada. That's the punchline, and that's the big. But then the second thing, I think the diversity, war on woke, which is the term of the moment. There is a big difference between Canada and the United States. We are very different countries, this is a country where you do have multiple identities. You're all Canadian, but you have your heritage. It's more prominent than it is in the U.S. I mean, there's some exceptions in the U.S. We have I'll say the Indigenous peoples, not the term we would necessarily use. They are First Nations in Canada. They are First Nations. It is a totally bilingualism. We are officially bilingual. And that these are all things that are unthinkable in the United States, quite frankly. I mean, the diversity element, maybe just a little less, although diversity and the promotion of diversity and inclusion is becoming an insult. And in some respects, you listen to some of the initiatives out of the US, could be a crime. In the United States. I mean, look, that's a big difference. And then you get into some of the institutional and social policy choices we make here. Healthcare is a right. It's not a business in this country. That comes with challenges, but that reflects the nature of the country. So yes, there's those pressures. And if I may bring it back to the current election, last point, I think these are on the table. Like, do you really believe in these elements of Canada, or have you been basically mouthing MAGA talking points with a Canadian twist for the last 3 years, and don't buy into them and wouldn't protect them? And that's, in the end, that's the choice Canadians are going to face.
I think if you're a full-time experienced politician, you've left that hanging mark. I'd have gone straight for Poilievre's.
You're right. You're right.
You were setting it up, but then you pulled your punch.
I don't want him to. Yeah, you're right. Fair enough.
So come on, land a few punches. I want to know about Poilievre. First of all, how do you pronounce it? Because every time I call him Poilievre, because as you say, Canada's a bilingual, I get told it's Poilievre.
Yeah, it doesn't. He doesn't use the h. So Poilievre.
Poilievre. Okay.
Poilievre.
And tell us about him.
Look, he is. You know the type. He is a lifelong politician. The only job he's ever had he got is being a politician. He was a political staffer. He got elected to the House of Commons very early on, his low 20s. Said he was only going to serve 2 terms. He's ended up serving. I think he's probably into his 5th. He's got the biggest pension, publicly paid pension of anyone. And he's that lifelong politician that, you can only believe so much in the free market if you're a tenured professor at Chicago or you're a lifelong politician, right? And he just sort of worships in that world. He defaults to the same solutions all the time. And he's also, I honestly believe he disdains much about the country, much of what I just described, which to me, and I think to Canadians, is the nature of the country. He disdains. So he's been on this mantra for the last several years. Canada's broken, and Canada's broken because we're stupid. Okay, Canada's broken because we're stupid. And he finds an echo chamber with Jordan Peterson and other people who he sits down and talks with. So there's a disdain for the country that he envisions. It's pretty awkward for him now that the country's coming together and it's Canadian pride, and we're under attack by the very people that he's been cozying up to. So literally, as we speak, he's trying to find a Canadian flag to wrap himself in and play patriot. Last refuge of a scoundrel. The last time I checked, if I know my American history, Anthony.
It's but you know what? Right now it's working. That's the thing that has people like me and Alastair and you concerned. So it's
not working though, because now it's being called out. We're in a position where, if I may, where the consequences of these attitudes are becoming apparent. And, so we have what is an economic attack, economic force, to use the word of the president against Canada, series of insults that we're the 51st state and our prime minister is a governor, etc. And Canadians are looking for 2 things. Well, who's been defending the country and who's been running it down? He's been running it down. I've been defending it. And who can build, who can negotiate with President Trump, but also, very importantly, and I think this is more important, it goes back to being masters in our own home. Like, who is going to drive this economy forward? And that, as you know, Mooch, it puts you in a better negotiating position if you're strong at home, right? You got to be strong where you are in order to negotiate abroad.
So let me just ask this question from an American perspective. The right, they disagree with each other, Mark, but they all lock together. They get very well organized in the United States. There are many senators, still a donor to some of them, that they dislike Donald Trump, but they'll say very positive things about him in the press. The left in our country, Barack Obama once made a comment. He said, I'm a member of 6 disorganized parties. I'm a Democrat. Everyone laughed. But is that true in Canada? And if it is, how do you, as the leader, you win the party's leadership, how do you galvanize everybody and have the organization and skill set to keep everybody in the boat the way the right does?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first is that the Liberal Party in Canada has traditionally balanced the 2. And so, to use the color scheme here, red is liberal, blue is conservative. And so you'll have a component of the Liberal Party, which is blue liberals who are fiscally conservative, care about the economy, but also care about social justice. Then there's a big wing of the party, if I can talk about it in those terms, that takes the economy more or less for granted and thinks about those social justice issues and where should we move forward on those. And the job of the leader is to balance the two. And when things get out of line, to bring them back into equilibrium. It goes back to an earlier discussion we have. I think things got out of line in terms of less attention on the economy and fiscal responsibility. It's part of my role is, look, that's what I know. I care about those other issues, but I know that, look, we can't redistribute what we don't have. We can't be strong abroad if we're weak at home. We can't build for the future if we can't manage the present. So let's do all those things now, make ourselves strong. And that's what's going to ensure that, we have big, I'll make one other point. We have big challenges in our healthcare system here. Many countries do. It's a provincial responsibility, not a federal responsibility. But if the federal government isn't helping to make sure that our economy is strong, those provinces don't have enough resources to fix their healthcare system. I mean, that's the reality. And I think that's how you broker it. And I'm being very upfront with people as I go around the country that's part of what's at stake.
Mark, on the podcast recently, we put a shout out to Poilievre to come on and do an interview, and I can't believe that there won't be at least somebody in his team who's watching this interview. So I want to repeat that now.
They're in the live chat, I'm sure.
I'd like to get to know him better. I actually watched his interview with Jordan Peterson. You're right; it was a sort of right-wing populist talking point. Love it. But who do you see when you've got two campaigns running simultaneously? You're in a campaign for the leadership,
yeah,
and you're in a campaign which you want to win that, and then you're straight into a campaign for the country. Okay. Very different challenges. And
potentially straight in, potentially not. That's not decided.
Yeah. Okay, but you don't have long. Put it that way. You don't have long.
I'm going to see how many Scaramuccis I get in this role.
Well, and I'll be counting them. And just so you know, I'm the official scorer. So if Alastair says 4 Scaramuccis, wait until I give
I will wait for
final referee review of everything. Okay, just make sure.
But just tell me what's the core of your strategy to win the leadership? And beyond that, what's the core of your strategy then to get elected against Poilievre?
Well, look, there are two things on the core of the strategy for the leadership is versus Poilievre. It's straight against Poilievre and straight more positively what we can do for the country. I think it's important to have that. You got to have that positive vision. That's why I'm in is to build the country, make us stronger, so we can, bring everyone up with our broader social programs and others. What has to come alongside that for the leadership process, though, is galvanizing the base, building the base of the Liberal Party. We've increased the Liberal Party membership collectively. It's gone up almost 4 times to 400,000 members over the course of the last month. I'm spending the vast majority of my time crisscrossing the country, meeting with Liberals. We're getting huge crowds, 1,000 people out, those kind of numbers. Minus 30 in Saskatoon on Wednesday. This is and that's energizing, as right? When you're going out and meeting people and hearing what they need and coming back and forth with them. So, core for the leadership, apart from, basically it's a general election campaign type strategy, if I can put it that way, going what we see for the country, what we're going to do, showing the sharp contrast with Poilievre. But in parallel, building the party, because we've got to build the party back up, and so far it's going well.
When you sit down with your key people, and you're being absolutely honest with yourself and with each other, what do you define as your core strengths and your core weaknesses?
Look, your strength is always your weakness. So my strength is, I think you touched on it at the start. My strength is I know how the world works. I know how to get things done. I'm connected. I can deliver for the country. And my weakness is, people will charge me as being elitist or a globalist, to use that term, which is, that's exactly, it happens to be exactly what we need. My weakness as a politician is I've not been a politician, right? So I didn't go straight into, as you observed, the killer. The point was right, but the delivery was. I'm working on it. I am, but that's fair. I haven't been a politician. I am a pragmatist. I am a leader. I'm a leader of organizations. I'm a leader in crises. So that's the strength that I'm trying to project, and it resonates. I feel it resonates across the country.
Anthony, how would, if you were on the other side of a fight with Mark Carney, how would you take him on?
Well, he's tough. He can't be underestimated because he knows the policy and he knows how to come back to you in a very subtle way, right? So Trump has all that bombast, and the right is, like a rock'em sock'em robot. So I would probably go after Mark on, and again, Mark, forgive me, but I would probably go after you that you left the country, you were at the Bank of England. It's not a carpetbagger label because you're a Canadian native and a Canadian citizen, but I would try to position you that you're out of touch with the mainstream common citizen in Canada. That's probably what I would try to do. And your response to that would be?
Well, my response would be twofold. One is that I'm not, because I live here and work here, and I'm, my life has been in service, or most of my life in Canada has been in service of those of Canadians. And then secondly, who's more in touch with everyday Canadians? Someone like me, or someone who's been a lifelong politician, who lives in a taxpayer-funded mansion, who's driven around by a chauffeur and bodyguard, who has a lifetime pension paid by Canadian taxpayers, and whose diet of news is from the United States, is Fox News, whose favorite people are podcasters in the US, and who, if you could swap out Canada, if you swapped in America for Canada in most of his talking points, you'd think, okay, this is Trump, this is MAGA.
Well, I'm not saying that you have to be driven around by a chauffeur, but if you're traveling with Alastair Campbell from Glasgow to London, don't sit in steerage like he does. Okay, he had me jammed in between 3 or 4 service dogs, and I mean this was the train from hell. Okay, and Mark, I am a bougie person, right? I'm not a politician. So I just tell you, I'm a bougie person. But this guy, it's unbelievable. Don't travel with him.
He has traveled.
I have traveled with it.
Yeah, yeah.
He went to the Burnley Everton game.
Burnley Everton match. Yeah,
very, very, very comfortable.
In the back of the train, Mark. In the back of the train.
We're in the back of something.
Oh my God.
But let's just go to Trump. I want to ask you both. Marks out of 10. How surprised were you when Trump came in and literally the first other country he attacked, along with Mexico, was Canada? How surprised were you, Mark?
I'd say 6. I wasn't totally surprised. The relationship between him and the current prime minister, is not great. Number one. Number two, I felt that he would want a renegotiation of a quick renegotiation of NAFTA. In fact, I'll tell you a story very quickly. And so that's the second thing. But on the morning after the president was elected, the message from someone in the government was, Canadians are anxious. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay. And I contacted the PM and I was like, why is that the message? Everything is not going to be okay. These guys are going to come after us, and we're going to have to adjust. And it's better to prepare Canadians for that reality. Now, it happened so quickly that it quickly moved to dealing with that reality. So I was somewhat surprised. I'm surprised by the scale of it. I should be more succinct. I'm surprised by the scale of it, as opposed to the direction of it. I did expect that we wouldn't have a good start.
Anthony?
I would say that, look, it's right down his checklist, right? I mean, so, he's Vladimir Putin's president. And so what would you like to have? You'd like some destabilization of North America, some reordering of that. You'd like a lot of xenophobia and nativism in America. You want to turn the opinion of America to non-Americans as a cynical, harsher, harder country. I always tell my friends here, the outside world looks at America very differently than we as Americans look at it. And so, yeah, so I mean, he's doing very, very predictable things. I guess as a Canadian, though, I guess what I would say to you, can you wait out Donald Trump? And maybe Trudeau's message is it's going to be fine because we can wait him out. You know, and the issue is, you know, is he ever leaving? I mean, there's a group of people here who think he's going to try to figure out a way not to leave, at which point there'll be a constitutional crisis. But
yeah,
as a Canadian, you have your interests. You have to put Canada first, but you're also a North American. So how do you go about this, Mark?
I think I'm going to answer this way. I think it would be a mistake to just assume. It is a mistake to assume that this is an aberration. This is the second time the president's been elected, as you've detailed, and I do listen to you guys both on The Rest is Politics and Trip US.
Who do you like more, Carney? Who do you like more?
Caddy and Rory.
That was like a 7. Hey, Alistair, that was like a 7-10 split in bowling. Okay,
no, that's him being he's learning much. He's being political.
I'm trying to keep. I'm Big Ten.
Hold on
Big
a second.
Ten.
I think I lost something down here. Let me just pick it back up.
It's a Big Ten. No, look. So I think it's a mistake to see it as aberration. This is a point you have made, Anthony, several times. You know, the sort of depth in terms of the reorientation. I listen very carefully whenever the vice president speaks. And there's depth in terms of the orientation there. So that's first thing. The second is, where does Canada, U.S. go medium term? Look, there are certain areas where it makes sense for us to be quite tightly tied under any type of administration. The nature of our auto sector, for example, conventional oil and gas, there's existing relation. I know the president's going after it, but just the balance on energy security. We need to diversify our markets for conventional oil and gas, and we will. I think security, including the security in the Arctic, very much hugely important issue. We're going to spend. My government will really focus on this, but doing it in concert with the U.S. makes all the sense in the world, and I think that logic will play out. But at the same time, an absolute imperative for us is to diversify our commercial relationships internationally. And we are the energy of the future. We are we have the biggest deposits of uranium. We're the biggest non-China on rare earths and metals and minerals. We are a clean energy superpower starting, and that's going to expand. Those are huge. Those are great cards. And we're not just going to give those cards to the United States. In fact, we're going to play them with other jurisdictions as well as the United States. And so diversifying that is important. And I think it's welcome to have a silver lining on this, is that the last few months have really shaken Canadians, if you will, or those who make those decisions, that's what we need to do.
How would you take it? Let's say you become Prime Minister. How will you handle it psychologically, politically, diplomatically, when he starts calling you the 51st governor?
He shouldn't.
But he will.
We'll see.
Because?
Change creates opportunity, and there are some serious issues between the countries, serious issues that we can work on together quite effectively. The border issues around fentanyl. I've made this point that I understand why the president has focused on that. It is a full-blown crisis in the United States. It's a very, very serious, it's a tragedy in Canada as well. But he's focused on America, and we need to work with him on that. Issues around security and others, we can work together. We'll have to see when that serious conversation really happens with the United States, whether it's after this process is finished, we have a new prime minister. Obviously, I hope it's me. And before an election, whether there can be constructive engagement, then that would be the most, that would be the best circumstance, at least, or after a mandate from the people. But that we will have a Canadian government with a strong mandate, I think, to negotiate with the United States, and my government will have many other options than just going in there and accepting a piece of paper. Poilievre will have the agreement written for him.
You see what Mark is saying that he's not going to say, because you're actually a really good politician, Mark, way better than me and Alastair. Okay, but what's happened here is Trump has been briefed now. Trump made his bloviating comments, and then his team got to him and said, okay, just so you know, this is the amount of electricity that California gets from Canada. This is the amount of aluminum that our car manufacturers get. Oh, by the way, we built our refineries in such a way to refine Canadian oil. Okay. And that's why that pipeline that they were all fighting over was put in place. And so Trump has been told by his advisors, be careful what you wish for with Canada. So when Mark is saying we'll see, he knows that a reset up in Canada will give Trump a chance to reset, because the Canadians, whether the Americans like it or not, can really damage the U.S. economy. And so, Trump goes off half-cocked, but he's now been briefed. And this will give Mark, and this is the most compelling case you've made for your prime ministership, is that if you want Canada to be strong and you want Canada to be vibrant, independent, and sovereign from America, the Canadian people have to go with you, Mark, because you don't want to slave in that position to Donald Trump. And hopefully the majority of the Canadian citizens will see that, and you'll be in the best position, I think, to keep the integrity of what we love about Canada.
I hope your comms people are listening to that last bit, Mark. Do you want a leader or do you want a slave?
I'm available for 11 days, Mark. This is a consultant, okay?
Or a slave.
I expire.
We need some front stabbing up here,
Anthony. For somebody who's only ever done the job for 11 days, I thought that was pretty good messaging. But he was still at the 51st state stuff yesterday. Yeah, and he's hard to get off these shticks when he gets into them.
Yeah, look, understood. But you can go from that to a partnership. Things change, right? Anthony knows this. Things can change very quickly, and we can be in a position where we have, once again, the greatest trade deal in history, which is, what the President Trump described what they call USMCA as, and now he says it's the worst deal. I mean, it is the deal he signed. So things can go back the other direction. And part of our job is my job would be to accomplish that in a way that's best for Canada. But of course, you're not going to get a deal unless something also works for the United States as well. Mm-hmm. Underscored all of this, though, is and the mood of the country, rightly, Canadians are very, very smart, and they clock the fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. And they want to build out from at home. We'd love to do a good agreement with the United States. I think that agreement is possible, but it takes both sides to come to it. But at a minimum, and I'm going to quote former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, conservative, did appoint me as governor of the Bank of Canada, so I owe him for that. And he said, look, the country should be prepared to take significant economic pain to protect our sovereignty versus the United States. His words to that effect last week, which is the mood of the country. And I'll give you one fact, though, which is the hit from U.S. tariffs. Let's say President Trump does 25% tariffs across the board, including on energy and various things, maybe a little more on aluminum, a little more on autos. That impact on our GDP it's significant, but it's smaller than if we move to free trade in Canada. We got a lot of interprovincial trade barriers. So when we talk about being masters in our own home, being in control of our destiny, we can have free trade in Canada and offset President Trump. And that's before we do a bunch of these big projects and build all the homes and everything else we need. So if we really set our minds to it, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine.
You mentioned the vice president, and yesterday he was in Munich at the security conference, and he made one of the most extraordinarily charmless, offensive, infantile on many levels speeches I think I've ever seen a senior politician make. I'm not expecting you to agree with my analysis, but I just wondered whether you felt, as I did watching it, this is really, really weird. These guys have decided that their friends are their enemies and their enemies are their friends. He's nicer about Putin than he is about Germany. That is weird.
I think the following. I read the speech. I didn't see it live. I read it this morning, and maybe delivery different. I thought the points about, I'm going to call it liberty, freedom of speech, liberty, I think bear reflection. I don't know that all the examples are exactly as they were depicted, but
they weren't.
Yeah, okay. But the general point which we face as democracies of what is free speech and what do we allow and what is positive and negative liberty, I think these are important things in this age of disinformation.
Yeah, this is a guy who pretends that Trump didn't lose the election against Biden. This is a guy who says the AP have been banned from the White House because they refused to say Gulf of America. Okay.
Yeah.
You're a politician. You're a politician.
I'm taking what the vice president said, not what the vice president said in that element there. I thought that of course, it's often what's unsaid, which is your point. Which is that you're at the Munich Security Conference and you're not talking about the biggest threats to our democracies, which are China and Russia and Iran, particularly. And so it was, life is all about choices. It was an interesting choice, but I wouldn't totally discount these issues about freedom of speech and getting those right and getting the balance right and being upfront about how you get the balance right are hugely important. And, last point I'll make, and I hand back, which is we have a real issue in Canada, as other places do, with foreign interference in our election or in our democratic processes. And we've seen it from, most of the major powers, including the tech powers, I might add, but also the major powers. And it's a very live issue of how do we preserve a public space where it's battle of ideas, with common facts, so Canadians can make informed decisions.
Mark, I got to ask you this. Put your different hats on that you've worn in your career and think about it historically over the last 80 years. Has America been abused and taken advantage of by the global community? And if it hasn't, make the case why it hasn't. And if it has, what does it say about where Trump and Vance are speaking from?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure those are the adjectives or the verbs I'd use. But
those are Trump's words. That's why I'm using.
I think, fair enough. I think that the whole thing around Pax Britannia before and Pax Americana after is that you're so dominant as a part of the global economy that it's in your interests to support the institutions and peace because you get more of the gains of it. You get a disproportionate amount of the gains. And as you get smaller relative to the global economy, that becomes less and less the case. Okay. So that's just a natural dynamic that works there. It's not all altruism. The second thing is that I think there has been an element of taking America for granted and the scale of American commitments for granted. And people, Canada included, have to catch up. This is something that didn't occur overnight. It's occurred over decades. So there is some merit. There's quite often merit in what the president is saying, or elements of merit. I think what is most concerning, I'll stop on this, and this is a domestic and an international point, which is around the rule of law and what are the norms and structures that operate. And if looking at you in the backdrop, the New York skyline there, when you look at financial markets and how the global economic system is, one of the most important things is you operate where there's rule of law and under certain rules of the game. And look, the rules of the game are changing pretty rapidly. I don't think the market is, the market kind of sometimes goes through these periods where it doesn't realize things and then all of a sudden starts to price them in. I think we're getting close to that. If this trade war continues to intensify, we're in a very, very different economic world. So yes, yes to the first part of your question. I'm just adding on some of what's at stake.
Mark, we got lots of questions on the chat, which I've been looking at. We haven't got to. I said at the start, we shouldn't keep you for more than an hour because you've got a campaigin to run.
I got to get out and talk to
okay, and you know, in fact, you should have been much tougher with us on the timekeeping, but there we are. But we also got some. Once we advertised we were doing this, we got some questions from the Global Mail. I don't know if they've been chasing you, but they sent in lots of questions. They were really interested in your take on China, your position on China in relation to foreign interference in Canada, which you mentioned, you alluded to there. What measures you take against China, if any, and what sectors of the Canadian economy you might limit. And it is interesting. This is the thing about Trump. Before Trump, if we were having this conversation, we probably would be talked a hell of a lot more about China, instead of which we've been talked mainly about Trump.
Yeah. So look, we have a very challenging relationship with China because of Chinese actions, Chinese foreign interference, which is well documented. Unfortunately, well documented in previous Canadian elections and attempts at foreign interference. And I would commend actually our what's called our foreign office called Global Affairs Canada that recently caught some more attempts in this leadership election actually against Chrystia Freeland, apparently from Chinese sources. So these are serious issues. They're cannot be accepted and be without consequence. First thing. Secondly, we had a long-standing issue with the kidnapping, in effect, of two of our citizens, and that rightly has had consequences. So the relationship with China has been deeply affected, and we will have some opportunity to reset. But from a very different base, and elements of trust will need to be built up in certain areas. But the era of convergence. I'll make an obvious point. The view of the 90s and 2000s that there would be this economic and ultimately political convergence with China. That's decidedly over, ended a long time ago. And so we'll be very clear-eyed in terms of our relationships there.
Mooch, last question, I'll leave it to you.
It's 2028, Mark. Where is Canada? What's your vision for your beautiful country?
2028, we are much stronger as an economy. We have deep trading relationships with Europe, with like-minded countries in Asia, particularly Korea, Japan, Australia. We've got a balanced budget. We've got full employment. We've got real wages growing. And at the same time, we've made real advances in terms of economic reconciliation with First Nations. And growing jobs for all strata of society, including very much, let me make two final points, white working class young men. And final point is that we're confident in ourselves. We celebrate our diversity, we recognize it, and we're an example to the Western world that you can balance social progress with economic strength, and we start to get a few imitators.
And does the G7 still exist?
Yeah, we're going to stop at 7. We're not looking at actually that. Let me reframe that. I'm not sure we could add, but we're not adding Russia.
Hey, we tried that. Oh. Well, listen, Mark, it's been lovely to talk to you again. Your team's got a football match this afternoon against Crystal Palace, but I suspect you've got to be out working.
I will check the score at the end of the day. The big match or game tonight is Canada, United States ice hockey in Montreal in what's called the Four Nations. It's the biggest hockey game in the country in 25 years. Well, I don't know. Maybe since we played the Soviets It's the biggest game in Canada since we played the Soviets in 1972.
And where do you stand on booing the American national anthem right now?
Well, when the U.S. team disassociates themselves from calling us the 51st state, then we'll cheer the American anthem. Look, it's Canadians in the very, very short term have few outlets for their frustrations. In the medium term, in the not too distant future, I'm going to provide them with an outlet, which is a positive agenda. But if the way they express themselves is to boo the American national anthem, well, our country is under attack repeatedly and daily. Fair enough.
Good to talk
Well,
to you.
listen, Mark, I've known you for over 3 decades,
Yeah.
and you have the right combination of kindness and toughness that your country needs. And so I wish you nothing but the greatest success, and I hope I can be helpful to you in the future. And I've enjoyed our friendship over the years.
Thank you very much, Mooch. And thank you, Alastair.
My pleasure. I'm obviously just
You are
totally-
now my 2 favorite.
No, it's too late.
Too late. It's too
I already
late.
got buried. I already got buried in the chat. I mean, I'm ranked 4th out of the 4 hosts. I mean, it's terrible. I'm not even on the Olympic medal stand. It's just terrible.
All right.
See you soon. Take care, Mark.
All
Thanks
right.
very much.
All the best. Bye.